Chapter 1. The Dawn over the Seven Hills. Before the city has fully remembered its own name, before the bronze hinges of shops have begun to sigh open, before the sandals of merchants and petitioners have traced their patient routes through the stone corridors of Rome, there is only the pale breathing of dawn, moving softly over the seven hills like a linen veil drawn by an unseen hand. The sky above the eastern ridges is not yet golden, but a hushed blue, faintly diluted with pearl. And the last stars remain suspended for a little while over the sleeping roofs, as though reluctant to abandon the deep, cool quiet that belongs to the hours before speech. Below, the Tiber carries the night away in long, unhurried folds of water, its surface dim and silvered beneath a low river mist that clings to the banks, to the reeds, to the worn stones of the quays, and to the dark hulls of moored boats whose ropes creak with the gentlest motion. The river does not hurry, for it has passed by this city since before marble rose from brick, before temples found their shapes against the sky, before roads stretched outward like thoughts from the mind of an empire. And in this tender hour, it seems almost older than history, murmuring softly to itself as it bends around the foot of the Aventine, carrying faint reflections of cypress, warehouse, bridge, and cloud. On the Palatine Hill, where the air is clean and slightly cooler, the outlines of porticos and private gardens emerge gradually from shadow, and the leaves of stone pine and laurel are still dark with dew. Somewhere behind a courtyard wall, a servant moves quietly, stirring embers beneath a clay hearth, and the first thread of smoke rises into the morning with the scent of ash, olive wood, and yesterday's bread. The great houses remain enclosed in their inward-looking calm, their atria dim, their mosaic floors cool beneath the faintest light, their painted walls still holding the colors of sleep. Cinnabar red, deep ochre, mineral green, and a blue so soft it appears almost to have been breathed onto the plaster. From the crest of the Palatine, the city reveals itself, not all at once, but by degrees, as if a vast relief carving were being touched slowly by light. The Capitoline Hill waits ahead, solemn and compact, crowned with temples whose roofs and pediments gather a first delicate brightness along their edges. The Aventine rests farther off, more spacious and quiet, its slopes breathing the scent of gardens, fig trees, and damp earth. The Caelian, Esquiline, Quirinal, and Viminal lift themselves from the fading dimness like islands rising from a sea of roofs, each hill holding its own sleeping streets, its own stairways, shrines, fountains, and doorways, its own subtle music of waking stone. In the hollow between the hills, the Forum Romanum lies almost empty, and because it is empty, it can be seen with unusual tenderness. The paving stones, worn by generations of measured feet, retain the night's coolness, and the long rectangular spaces between basilicas, arches, temples, and speaking platforms are filled not with argument or ceremony, but with a lucid stillness. The rostra, where voices will later rise and fall in public cadence, is silent now, its bronze ornaments dark against the paling air. The curia waits with closed dignity, its severe front standing quietly beneath the early sky, while the columns of temples around it hold their shadows close, as if reluctant to surrender them. Near the temple of Saturn, the tall columns stand like watchful elders, their bases surrounded by the faintest breath of morning haze. Here, where records, wealth, vows, and memory have rested beneath sacred protection, there is for the moment only the subdued fragrance of cold stone, damp dust, and the mineral sweetness that comes from masonry after a night of cooling air. The steps are empty, yet they seem to remember the weight of robes, tablets, sandals, and offerings, just as the air itself seems to remember the low sound of Latin speech, though now that speech has withdrawn into silence, leaving behind only the shape of expectation. The temple of Vesta, round and inward, holds the presence of flame even before its glow is seen. And in the stillness around it, there is a gentleness unlike the grander solemnity of the surrounding monuments. Its sacred fire belongs not to conquest or display, but to continuity, to hearth and household, to the invisible thread that binds the city's public stone to the small domestic lamp, the bread oven, the marriage couch, the cradle, and the ancestral mask resting in a shadowed alcove. The house of the Vestals nearby lies in quiet balance, its courtyard still veiled in blue shade, its pools reflecting the paling sky in surfaces so smooth they seem untouched by time. Gradually, the dawn begins to descend from the highest cornices and settle upon the marble. It touches the edges of fluted columns before it reaches their shafts. It gathers briefly along roof tiles, lintels, and carved capitals. It slips into the fine cuts of inscriptions, filling the names of magistrates, builders, emperors, gods, and benefactors with a faint luminosity. The city, in these moments, is not yet crowded by its own greatness. It is tactile, intimate, and almost vulnerable, a place of stone slowly warming, of bronze still cool beneath the hand, of thresholds dark within and pale without. A few early figures begin to appear, not as interruptions, but as part of the city's slow awakening. A water carrier moves with balanced shoulders through a narrow street, his jars knocking softly against one another with a hollow ceramic sound. A baker, flour pale on his forearms, opens a shutter, and from the darkness behind him comes the warm, yeasty scent of dough and the deeper smell of an oven newly stirred from embers. A priest's assistant crosses a paved way with careful steps, carrying objects wrapped in cloth. Somewhere a mule exhales. Somewhere a rooster offers a thin, distant call. Somewhere a fountain begins its day without ever having ceased its night, pouring clear water into a basin whose rim has been smoothed by countless hands. From the aqueduct-fed channels and public fountains, from the drains beneath the paving stones, from the damp edges of the river and the washed thresholds of houses, there rises a quiet music of water, so constant that the city seems to breathe through it. Rome is built of stone, timber, tile, and human intention. Yet at dawn, it is water that gives it motion. The hidden flow entering baths not yet opened, the narrow streams serving basins and gardens, the faint, wet shimmer along streets cleaned before morning traffic, the dew gathering at the feet of statues, the Tiber turning in its bed with the patience of something that has seen every generation arrive thirsty and depart silent. Above the Forum, the sky grows clearer, and the mist begins to loosen from the low places. The first sunlight reaches the upper walls of the Basilica Aemilia, glancing across columns and shadowed arcades, where later voices will blend into a woven murmur of business, legal petition, exchange, and greeting. For now, its spaces are still broad and calm, holding the cool breath of night inside them. The stones seem almost to listen. Even the statues, pale in the strengthening light, appear less like proclamations than like presences keeping a gentle vigil over the interval between darkness and day. This is Rome before its rhythm has quickened, roam before wheels strike the road with insistence, before sandals multiply into 1,000 overlapping routes, before the baths steam, the markets call, the scribes bend over wax tablets, and the sun climbs high enough to make every wall cast a sharp and decisive shadow. This is the city in its most inward hour, when the 7 hills hold the light like cupped hands, and the Forum lies open like a memory not yet spoken aloud, and the river, veiled in dissolving mist, continues its calm passage toward the sea. And as the day slowly gathers itself, as the blue of the morning softens into gold, the eternal city seems less to awaken than to become visible, detail by detail, breath by breath, until the cool marble, the sleeping temples, the damp paving stones, the first smoke, the first footsteps, and the slow silver movement of the Tiber all settle into one immense and tranquil rhythm, ancient, measured, and enduring. Chapter 2. The Morning Walks. By the time the first true warmth of morning begins to settle upon Rome, the city has already passed from its dreamlike blue into a quieter, steadier gold, and the Via Sacra, that old and solemn road of memory, receives the light along its worn stones, as though it were receiving a procession made only of sun. It does not awaken suddenly, for nothing in this hour seems willing to disturb the softness left behind by dawn. Instead, the road grows visible in patient increments, each irregular block of paving emerging from shadow with its edges silvered, its shallow depressions holding little traces of coolness, its surface polished by innumerable feet into a subdued, almost river-like sheen. To walk here in the morning is to move not through a street alone, but through a long, layered corridor of sacred habit and public remembrance, where architecture, ritual, commerce, and ordinary breath have slowly entered one another over centuries, until no single stone feels entirely silent. The Via Sacra bends through the Forum with a quiet dignity, passing between shrines and basilicas, beneath the gaze of columns and carved entablatures, beside steps that have known garlanded offerings, legal argument, festival robes, and the patient crossing of citizens with their cloaks drawn lightly around their shoulders. Yet now, before the sun has hardened the air, the road belongs to softness, to the pale dust rising only slightly beneath sandals, to the flutter of pigeons along a roofline, to the faint scent of crushed herbs from a basket carried past a doorway, and to the low murmur of fountains repeating themselves with exquisite restraint. The morning walker begins near the Valian rise, where the stones of the road slope gently down toward the Forum's open heart, and where the Arch of Titus stands in a posture of pale command, its single passage still cool with shade. The carved surfaces of the arch are not yet fully bright. They hold the light along their highest ridges first, along cornice, capital, and inscription, while the recessed reliefs remain in a softer grey, as though the figures cut into stone were still half within the night. The underside of the vault gathers a darker, calmer air, and as one passes beneath it, the sound of footsteps changes for a moment, becoming rounded and inward, a muted echo held briefly in the curve of masonry before dissolving into the open morning. Beyond the arch, the Via Sacra descends slowly, revealing the Forum by fragments rather than spectacle. A column appears first, then the spacing of columns, then a pediment, then the long horizontal calm of a basilica facade. The sun lies low enough that the fluting of marble shafts becomes a landscape of alternating light and shade, each groove holding a narrow thread of blue-grey coolness, each raised ridge touched by honey-colored fire. Corinthian capitals, with their carved acanthus leaves curling outward in disciplined abundance, seem almost botanical in the morning, as if the stone itself had remembered the gardens from which its forms were borrowed. There is tenderness in such architecture at this hour, because its grandeur has not yet been filled by the noise of the day. It stands exposed to light, texture, and proportion, awaiting human purpose, but not yet crowded by it. The temple of Venus and Roma rises toward the east with a breadth that seems made for dawn, its vast platform and ordered colonnades holding the early sun in long, even plains. There is a measured serenity in the temple's design, in the repeated verticals of columns, in the calm weight of the entablature, in the broad silence of steps ascending toward the sacred interior. Marble, where it remains polished, gives back the day in softened fragments, while older stone beneath it, tufa, travertine, concrete, brick, keeps a more muted presence, the hidden strength below the luminous surface. Ancient Rome is never only marble, though memory often makes it so. It is also timber doors, bronze fittings, terracotta roof tiles, lime plaster, brick stamps, iron cramps, dust in mortar joints, and the warm mineral smell that rises when stone begins to dry after the night. Along the road, small acts of mourning begin to gather. A man in a simple tunic pauses near a fountain to rinse his hands, and the water slips over his fingers with a sound so light it barely separates itself from the basin's continual overflow. A boy carrying wax tablets walks with careful speed, not hurried enough to break the calm, but alert to the errands already unfolding across the city. Two older men in pale wool move slowly beneath the shade of a portico, their conversation low and even, more breath than declaration. From somewhere behind a shop front comes the smell of warmed oil, lentils, coarse bread, and fish sauce, mingling with the cleaner fragrances of wet stone, laurel leaves, and sun-touched dust. As the Via Sacra draws the walker deeper into the Forum, the temple of Vesta appears again in its rounded grace, distinct among the stronger rectangular forms around it. Its circular shape changes the rhythm of the eye. Where basilicas stretch outward and temples lift forward in linear command, Vesta gathers space inward, enclosing sacred continuity in a form that seems to breathe. The columns around it cast slender shadows that fall across the pavement like dark reeds, and between them there is a hush associated with fire, not as blaze, but as ember, as guarded warmth, as the quiet persistence of the hearth through every change of season and ruler. Nearby, the house of the Vestals opens its long courtyard to the morning, where pools of water mirror broken columns, pale sky, and the still faces of statues worn into gentleness by time. The Regia, ancient in association and modest beside imperial vastness, stands with an authority that comes less from size than from depth of memory. Its walls and thresholds seem to belong to an older Rome, a Rome of kings remembered through priestly offices and carefully repeated rites, where sacred calendars, implements, and inherited obligations gave shape to the year as surely as roads gave shape to the city. In the early light, such a place does not demand attention. It receives it quietly, like a low voice continuing beneath a larger chorus. The walker senses that Rome's monumentality is built not only from triumphal arches and immense colonnades, but from small continuities preserved with reverence. A doorway maintained, a ritual repeated, a boundary marked, a flame watched, a stone remembered. The temple of Castor and Pollux stands nearby, its surviving columns rising with a slender, luminous nobility, their white shafts lifted above the darker bases and their capitals catching sunlight with extraordinary delicacy. Morning makes the temple less an object than an arrangement of intervals. Bright column, blue space, bright column, blue space, the pattern repeating against the widening sky. The entablature above seems to float, though every part of it is bound by weight, measurement, and construction, by the careful joining of quarried material and human intention. At the foot of the temple, the steps remain cool where shadow still rests, while their upper edges glow faintly, as though the sun were pouring down them like thin, warm water. Across the forum, basilicas begin to fill with a more definite brightness. These are places of shelter and movement, of business conducted beneath high roofs, of legal voices shaped by stone, of columns arranged to organize both space and attention. In the morning, before their interiors are fully occupied, they seem almost contemplative, their aisles holding soft air, their pavements stretching into perspective, their walls mottled by reflected light. A basilica is not a temple, yet it has its own solemnity, born from proportion, repetition, and the human need to bring order to dispute, exchange, petition, and public life. Even commerce, under such roofs, takes on a kind of architectural rhythm. The sunlight now reaches more deeply between the buildings, and the long shadows of columns cross the Via Sacra at measured angles, striping the road like a sundial laid upon the earth. Each step passes from warmth into coolness and back again, and the body begins to understand the city through sensation. The slight unevenness of basalt beneath the sole, the dry brush of tunic cloth against the knee, the faint heat gathering at the back of the neck, the smell of incense lingering near a shrine, the powdery touch of old stone under the fingers when one pauses beside a wall. Rome is immense, but it is also intimate in these details, entering the senses not as an idea of empire, but as texture, temperature, fragrance, and sound. By mid-morning, the Via Sacra will carry more weight. Litters will pass, clients will follow patrons, scribes will hurry with documents, vendors will call from shaded edges, and the forum's murmur will thicken into the complex music of civic life. But in this earlier hour, the road remains spacious enough for reverie, and the temples retain a meditative distance, their columns standing between earth and sky, with a stillness that seems almost humane. The city has begun its day, yet it has not surrendered its calm. And so, the morning walk continues, step by unhurried step, along the sacred road where sunlight gathers on marble, slips through colonnades, rests on inscriptions, and warms the pale dust at the bases of temples. The Via Sacra does not merely lead through Rome, it teaches the pace at which Rome may be felt. It asks for attention to shadow, to water, to stone, to the soft geometry of sacred buildings opening themselves to the day, and in its quiet ascent from dawn into morning, it offers the listener a city made not of haste, but of measured breath, golden light, and enduring form. Chapter 3. The Midday Meridiaccio. At midday, when the sun has climbed to its highest and most unwavering station above Rome, the city does not fall silent all at once, but withdraws by degrees into a slower and more inward rhythm, as though the great body of stone, brick, marble, timber, water, and human breath has chosen for a little while to lessen its exertion. The morning's footsteps soften. the voices that filled the forum thin and drift toward shaded colonnades. Shopkeepers lean behind their counters in the dimness beyond awnings. Animals stand with lowered heads in narrow bands of shade. Even the fountains seem to speak more quietly, their water descending into basins with a cool, continuous patience that belongs not to labor, but to rest. This is the hour of the meridiatio, the midday pause when heat gathers along exposed paving stones and the bright exterior of Rome becomes almost too luminous to gaze upon directly. The white edges of marble steps shine with a chalky brilliance. Roof tiles radiate their stored warmth. Bronze surfaces hold a subdued and dangerous glow, and the open squares, so alive only a short time before, appear emptied by the authority of the sun. Yet within the great library of Trajan, sheltered in the imperial precinct beside the vast forum that bears his name, the world changes completely, and the day, so bright outside, enters only as filtered radiance, softened by architecture, disciplined by shadow, and transformed into a cool, suspended calm. The threshold itself marks the passage from public brightness into contemplative shade. Outside, the Forum of Trajan extends in marble order beneath the wide Roman sky, with its colonnades, exedrae, pavements, and the distant vertical presence of Trajan's column, carved with spiraling memory. But within the library, the heat is held at a distance. The air becomes still and faintly mineral, touched by the scent of plaster, cedar shelving, papyrus, parchment, old leather ties, waxed tablets, and the dry sweetness of wood that has absorbed many summers without complaint. The floor beneath the feet is cool, even at noon, and its polished surface preserves a dim reflection of columns, sandals, hems of garments, and the low light resting between them. The library does not invite haste. Its proportions quiet the body almost immediately. High walls rise with grave and measured dignity, pierced by niches and cupboards where scrolls are stored in ordered rows, each roll bound, labeled, and placed within the careful architecture of knowledge. The shelves and armaria hold texts in Latin and Greek, records of law, rhetoric, poetry, philosophy, administration, memory, conquest, genealogy, and praise. Yet the presence of so much language produces not noise, but stillness. Thousands of words sleep here in cylindrical silence, enclosed in papyrus fibers and fine skins, waiting for the touch of a hand, the unrolling of a beginning, the slow attention of a reader seated in shadow. At this hour, few readers remain. A scholar sits near the side wall, his posture folded into patient concentration, one elbow resting beside a small wooden desk, his fingers touching the edge of an unrolled text as lightly as if he feared to disturb the thought within it. An older scribe, having set aside his reed pen, rests with his eyes lowered, not fully sleeping, but dwelling in that half-lit region between reading and dream. A servant moves once across the room and then disappears through a side passage, leaving behind only the faintest displacement of air. No one speaks unless speech is necessary, and when a word is uttered, it is brief, low, and absorbed almost immediately by the height of the walls. The light comes from above and from the distant openings, but it arrives diminished, as though midday has been strained through stone. It lies in pale rectangles across the floor, gathers along the rims of shelves, and touches the curved ends of scrolls without fully waking them. Dust turns slowly in the shafts of illumination, not falling so much as hovering, each mote revolving with such delicate suspension that time itself appears to have loosened. Beyond the shaded room, The brightness of the outer world presses against the entrances, but here it becomes merely a suggestion, a silver-white margin, a reminder that the city is still under the sun, while the mind has retreated into a chamber made for duration rather than motion. In the Grand Library, architecture is a form of breathing. The columns do not merely support, they slow the gaze. Their shafts rise from cool bases with a calm verticality, drawing attention upward toward the coffered ceiling, where shadow gathers in recessed squares, and the faint gilding, if touched by light, glows as softly as embers banked beneath ash. Marble revetments on the walls hold muted veins of grey, cream, rose, and green, like rivers petrified within stone. And when the eye follows those veins, it seems to travel into mountains, quarries, barges, workshops, and the long patience of craftsmen whose hands once polished these surfaces until they answered light with restraint rather than glare. There is a particular quiet found only in libraries, and in Rome at midday it deepens into something almost sacred. It is not the open silence of a deserted road, nor the solemn silence of a temple before ritual, nor the domestic silence of an atrium during sleep. It is a silence inhabited by thought. It contains the dry whisper of a scroll being turned, the soft contact of papyrus against papyrus, the slight creak of a wooden chair, the distant murmur of water from a courtyard fountain beyond the walls, and the almost inaudible breathing of those who have come here not to declare, bargain, plead, or command, but to enter the company of words preserved from elsewhere and before. The midday rest settles over the readers with a gentle and democratic gravity. Outside, rank may be visible in fabric, retinue, rings, and address, but inside the shaded library, all bodies yield equally to the same coolness, the same pause, the same lowered pulse. A senator's hand rests beside a text no more loudly than a student's. A freedman copying a passage bends his neck beneath the same dim light as a magistrate reading an ancestral account. The heat outside has simplified the city's ambitions, reducing them for this suspended hour to the need for shade, water, breath, and stillness. One can imagine from within this room the wider precinct lying quiet beyond the walls. The great forum's pavements hold the sun. The markets nearby, usually alive with exchange and footsteps, retreat into their deeper shade. The massive column stands outside, its carved bands ascending through brightness, while within the library the events recorded in stone outside may also be held in written form, transformed from marching figures and sculpted scenes into lines of script, names, dates, places, accounts, and measured phrases. Rome remembers in many materials, in marble relief, in bronze inscription, in ritual formula, in spoken lineage, and here, most quietly, in scrolls stored away from dust, weather, and forgetfulness. The scent of the room grows more noticeable as the body stills. There is the faint dryness of papyrus, made from river reeds and carrying, perhaps only in imagination, some distant memory of marsh water and sun. There is the resinous trace of cedar wood, used to protect delicate materials from insects, a fragrance clean, calm, and slightly bitter. There is the wax of tablets, softened just enough by warmth to release a mild honeyed odor. There is wool, linen, oiled skin, stone dust, and the subtle human warmth of those who are resting in proximity without disturbance. Together, these form an atmosphere not perfumed, but preserved, a fragrance of knowledge kept safe in the cool interior of empire. As the hour lengthens, the library seems to loosen its attachment to ordinary time. The sun outside moves, but slowly. The bands of light on the floor shift so subtly that only a patient eye can follow them. A shadow that had touched the base of a column withdraws by a hand's breadth. A bright shape near the entrance grows narrower. The reader near the wall lifts his hand, turns the scroll a little farther, and lets the newly revealed text rest open before him. The scribe's eyes close completely for a brief interval, and his breathing deepens. The room accepts these small human gestures without comment. In such a place, Rome's grandeur becomes inward. It is no longer the grandeur of arches crossing the sky, roads extending toward provinces, baths steaming with civic abundance, or amphitheaters holding multitudes, but the quieter magnitude of storage, classification, reading, copying, and remembering. The library of Trajan gathers the empire not by noise, but by arrangement, not by movement, but by preservation. Its cool shadows are as much a part of Roman power as its sunlit monuments, because they protect the slow continuity of thought, and they offer, in the very center of the city, a refuge where the mind may move while the body rests. And so, during the Meridiatio, the Grand Library holds its absolute quiet, like water held in a stone basin. Outside, Rome shimmers beneath the noon, white and gold and nearly breathless. But inside, in the long shadows among scrolls, columns, shelves, and softened marble, the day becomes deep, blue-gray, and still. The listener may linger here without urgency, feeling the cool floor, hearing the distant fountain, breathing the dry sweetness of papyrus and cedar, and sensing that even in the heart of the eternal city, amid all its vastness and ambition, there remains an hour devoted not to conquest or ceremony, but to silence, shade, and rest. Chapter 4. The Courtyard Oasis. In the deep inwardness of the afternoon, when Rome beyond the walls has grown bright, resonant, and warm beneath the long dominion of the sun, there exists within the private house another city entirely, smaller than the vast public Rome of basilicas and temples, yet no less intricate in its ordering of light, water, shade, memory, and repose. The Roman domus does not reveal its quietness at once. From the street it may appear restrained, even severe, its facade turned toward the world with few openings, its threshold guarded by shadow, its life concealed behind timber doors, painted plaster, and the careful social choreography of entrance and reception. But once the noise of the street has been left behind, and once the visitor has passed through the vestibule, across the cool floor of the atrium, and beyond the formal spaces where ancestors, clients, and household obligations keep their measured presence, the house begins to open inward, unfolding toward the peristyle courtyard like a breath released after long restraint. Here, in the protected heart of the domus, the outside world seems not merely distant, but gently dissolved. The cries of vendors, the wheels on stone, the hoofbeat of animals, the civic murmur of the city, the footsteps of men moving toward forum, bath, shrine, or market, all are reduced to a faint and indistinct pressure beyond walls thick enough to soften life into silence. The courtyard receives only what it chooses to receive. Light filtered through columns, air cooled by water, fragrance gathered from leaves and flowers, and the slight shifting of shadows as the afternoon slowly changes its angle. It is not empty, yet it is profoundly still. A chamber of open sky enclosed by human intention, where architecture does not dominate nature, but frames it, calms it, and teaches it to move at the pace of rest. The peristyle columns stand in a regular rhythm around the garden, their painted surfaces pale in the shaded air, their bases resting on pavements of mosaic and marble that remain cool even when the tiles of the roof beyond have begun to store the day's heat. Each column casts a slender band of shadow across the floor, and those shadows lie like quiet measures of time, darkening the patterned stones, crossing borders of black and white tesserae, touching the feet of low benches, clay planters, and shallow basins in which still water holds fragments of column, sky, and leaf. The geometry of the courtyard is calm and deliberate. Portico, garden bed, path, basin, statue, threshold, wall painting, vine, and open air. Each element placed in relation to the others so that the eye may travel without haste and return always to the fountain at the center. The fountain is small, not monumental, and for that reason its presence is almost more complete. From a carved spout, perhaps the mouth of a mask, perhaps the beak of a little bronze bird darkened by age and mineral traces, water slips continuously into a stone basin with a sound so delicate that it seems to ask the listener to become quieter in order to hear it fully. It does not splash with force. It does not insist. It gathers, trembles, spills, and gathers again, forming a slow cycle of descent and renewal, a thread of movement fine enough to bind the whole courtyard together. Every other sound arranges itself around this trickling. The dry whisper of a leaf turning on its stem, the faint creak of a reed screen stirred by warm air, the soft settling of a bird somewhere in the shade, the remote breathing of the house. Water in this enclosed garden is not merely ornament, but atmosphere. It cools the air by almost imperceptible degrees, laying a faint freshness upon the skin and carrying with it the mineral scent of stone, the clean dampness of shaded basins, and the delicate green odor of plants whose roots have been watered in clay-bordered beds. The basin's rim has been touched often, perhaps by children leaning over to watch their own reflections tremble, perhaps by women placing flowers upon the surface, perhaps by servants rinsing their fingertips before withdrawing again into the ordered quiet of the household, where the water overflows into a narrow channel. It moves through the garden with the softness of a whispered line, darkening the earth beside herbs, myrtle, and small, carefully tended shrubs. Jasmine climbs along one side of the courtyard, trained upon trellis and wall, its leaves glossy where the light reaches them, and darker where they rest in shade. The blossoms are pale, almost luminous in the softened afternoon, small star-like openings whose fragrance is stronger than their size suggests, and yet never harsh. Their scent rises slowly, mingling with the cooler breath of water, the resinous hint of cypress wood, the dusty sweetness of sun-warmed plaster, and the faint domestic odors drifting from deeper rooms. Olive oil, linen stored in cedar chests, a trace of lamp smoke, dried lavender, baked clay, and bread kept under cloth. It is the fragrance of enclosure, of domestic continuity, of a life turned inward toward shade and water after the brightness of public obligation. Along the walls beneath the portico, painted panels create a second garden inside the first. Slender trees rise upon fields of red, black, ochre, and soft blue-green. Impossible birds perch upon delicate architectural fantasies. Distant villas, painted with miniature columns and imagined terraces, seem to recede into landscapes that belong not to geography, but to reverie. The plaster is smooth where it has been carefully finished, though here and there the passage of years has made a fine network of hairline cracks. visible only when the light falls across them obliquely. These painted walls do not compete with the living garden. They deepen it, extending the courtyard into quiet illusion, so that the eye may drift from actual jasmine to painted laurel, from real shadow to imagined colonnade, from the water before the body to the painted water of a landscape that will never dry. A couch has been placed in the shade, its woven supports covered by cushions faded into colors gentled by use: muted saffron, dim rose, undyed wool, and a green like olive leaves seen through dust. A low table stands beside it, holding a cup, a small dish of figs, and a folded piece of linen. Nothing about these objects is ceremonial, yet in the stillness of the courtyard they take on a quiet dignity because they belong to the human scale of rest. Here one may recline without speaking. Here a hand may rest open upon cloth while the mind follows the fountain's repeated descent. Here the body, released from the glare of the street, the obligations of morning, finds itself gradually persuaded into calm. The household moves around this space with practiced softness. A servant crosses the portico carrying a bronze vessel and places it out of sight. A woman pauses near the jasmine, touches a leaf, and continues without haste. Somewhere beyond a curtained doorway, a child sleeps in the suspended warmth of the afternoon, and the faint rhythm of that sleep seems to belong to the courtyard itself. The domus is not deserted. Rather, it is composed, each presence absorbed into the slow harmony of enclosed life. Voices, when they arise, are low enough to be indistinguishable from the rustle of garments, and soon they fade, leaving again the water, the flowers, and the inward breathing of the walls. Above, the sky is visible only as a measured opening, a rectangle or softened quadrangle of light held within roof lines. It is intensely blue at its center, but near the edges it pales where sunlight meets the stuccoed surfaces of the upper walls. Occasionally, a bird crosses that quiet aperture, brief and silent, and then the sky is empty again. The sun does not enter the courtyard directly for long. It touches a strip of pavement, a cluster of leaves, the upper lip of the fountain, then moves onward, leaving behind warmth without glare. In this way, the garden seems to possess its own climate, neither fully outside nor fully within, but a moderated world in which the senses can loosen, expand, and rest. The outside city continues, of course, beyond the sealed dignity of the house. Rome is still immense. Its roads still carry movement. Its public spaces still hold transaction, ambition, devotion, law, and spectacle. Yet none of that reaches the courtyard except as a faint, unformed distance. The domus has gathered its inhabitants into an inner geography where the empire is reduced to a basin of water, a shaded colonnade, a flowering vine, a polished floor, a painted wall, and the calm persistence of domestic time. Here, power is not expressed by height or conquest, but by the ability to create stillness in the middle of abundance. And so the afternoon rests in the courtyard oasis, held between jasmine and stone, between shadow and filtered light, between the silent rooms of the house and the slow, perpetual voice of the fountain. Drop by drop, thread by thread, the water descends, gathers, spills, and descends again, teaching the hour to repeat itself gently. The listener may remain here as long as needed, breathing the fragrance of flowers, feeling the coolness rise from the basin, watching the shadows of columns lengthen across mosaic floors, and sensing that within the vast and restless eternal city there is also this private sanctuary, closed, fragrant, sun-shaded, and profoundly removed from every demand beyond the walls. Chapter 5. Twilight over the aqueducts. Toward evening, when the long brightness of the Roman day begins to loosen its hold upon stone, tile, road, and field, the city's outer edges grow perceptibly softer, as though the sun, having governed every surface since morning, now withdraws its authority with a measured and merciful hand. The heat that gathered along the pavements, walls, and roof lines slowly lifts into the air and disperses, leaving behind a gentler warmth at ground level, a fading radiance upon brick and marble, and a faint breath of coolness moving in from the open country beyond the gates. It is the hour when shadows lengthen without haste, when the outlines of buildings become calmer and more legible, when distant sounds travel farther through the evening air, and when Rome, immense and inwardly resonant, seems to listen again to the water that has sustained it all day. Beyond the dense neighborhoods, beyond the crowded forums, workshops, shrines, baths, courtyards, stairways, and roof terraces, the aqueducts rise across the landscape with a solemnity unlike any other architecture of the city. They do not enclose space as temples do, nor gather crowds as basilicas and amphitheaters do, nor receive the intimate habits of household life as the domus does. Rather, they travel. They cross the earth in long, patient sequences of stone arches, carrying water from distant springs, hills, and valleys toward the thirst of Rome, with a constancy so steady that it becomes almost invisible to the lives dependent upon it. At twilight, however, when the sky widens and the human city begins to quiet, their presence can be felt with extraordinary tenderness. The arches stand against the evening like a measured procession of openings, each curve repeating the last, each pier planted in the earth with grave composure, each span holding its portion of weight, distance, and purpose. Along their upper channels, hidden within masonry and lined to guide the flow, water continues its journey by the slightest obedience to gravity, moving not in spectacle, not in haste, but in an unbroken inclination toward the city. It has traveled through darkness, through stone-lined conduits, across valleys and over low plains, through settling tanks and channels carefully graded by surveyors whose instruments listened to the earth's imperceptible slopes. Now, as the day fades, that water is still moving, cold from its distant source, entering Rome's fountains, baths, basins, latrines, gardens, and private courtyards, threading itself through civic life with the quiet inevitability of breath. The sky behind the aqueducts changes by degrees, so subtle that the eye must become patient in order to receive them. At first, it is pale gold, almost white near the sun, with a brightness that blurs the upper edges of the arches. Then the gold deepens into honey, the honey into amber, and beyond it, toward the east, the blue of the afternoon settles into a cooler violet, faintly transparent, like color seen through thin linen. High clouds, if they are present, take on delicate undersides of rose and muted copper, while their upper rims remain briefly illuminated before surrendering to dusk. The long openings beneath the arches fill with shadow, and through those shadows the fields beyond appear in alternating fragments. Grass, road, cypress, low wall, distant roof, another band of darkening earth. The stone itself seems to change its nature in the failing light. In the fierce hours of noon, it may have appeared pale, dry, and almost severe, each block and joint exposed to the sun without mercy. But now, As evening settles, the masonry grows warmer in color and gentler in presence. Travertine, tufa, and brick acquire tones of ochre, rust, cream, and dusky rose. The rougher surfaces hold shadow in their small hollows, while the edges, still touched by the last light, glow with the softness of embers hidden beneath ash. Moss darkens in cracks where moisture has lingered. Grasses at the bases of the piers lean slightly in the evening air. A lizard, warmed all day by stone, becomes still upon a ledge and then vanishes into a narrow seam. The air cools slowly, and that cooling is itself a kind of music. It moves first across exposed skin as a mild release, a softening along the temples, the throat, the wrists, the backs of the hands. It carries the scent of dry grass, damp stone near water channels, distant smoke from hearths newly stirred for evening meals, and the resinous fragrance of pines standing dark against the western light. From the fields comes the subdued odor of earth after heat, a faint mineral sweetness mingled with the green bitterness of crushed stems beneath sandals. The road dust, lifted earlier by passing carts and animals, begins to settle, and with its settling, the landscape grows quieter, as though every particle were returning to rest. Near the aqueduct, one hears water more by implication than by volume. It is enclosed, guided, concealed within the elevated channel, yet the mind knows it is there, moving above the arches in a long, continuous line, and occasionally, where maintenance openings, distribution works, or nearby channels reveal its presence, the sound becomes perceptible. A low, steady murmur, a hollow coolness passing through stone, a liquid whisper repeated without emphasis. That sound is different from the garden fountain's delicate trickle, and different again from the river's broad earthbound turning. Aqueduct water is purposeful and serene, a disciplined flow gathered from far places and brought across distance by the patient intelligence of architecture. As twilight deepens, Rome itself begins to receive the aqueduct's evening gift. In public fountains, basins continue to overflow in narrow silver lines. In bath complexes, where heat, steam, and conversation have filled the afternoon, water settles into pools that reflect lamps and vaulted ceilings. In private houses, courtyards like the one left behind in the previous hour listen to their own small fountains descending into stone bowls. In kitchens, jars are filled. At street corners, the poor and the passing pause for a drink. The water arriving over the arches disperses into innumerable intimacies, touching hands, cooling floors, washing thresholds, nourishing gardens, and becoming part of bread, soup, steam, sleep, and prayer. The aqueducts themselves remain outside this domestic tenderness, vast and composed, bearing their burden without visible strain. Their beauty comes not from ornament, though some courses may show the care of fine masonry, but from repetition, proportion, and service. Arch after arch, shadow after shadow, pier after pier, they move across the land with a rhythm that resembles measured breathing. In the sinking light, their forms simplify until they seem almost musical, not as sound, but as pattern. Rise, curve, descend. Rise, curve, descend. Stone carrying water, water entering city, city exhaling into night. A few figures pass along the road beneath them, reduced by distance and dusk to quiet silhouettes. A cart moves slowly, its wheels sounding dull against the earth. A shepherd gathers animals toward an enclosure, his voice low and unhurried. A laborer, returning from some outer work, pauses near one of the great piers and touches the stone with the back of his hand. perhaps feeling the retained warmth of the day. No gesture is dramatic. Nothing breaks the gradual descent of evening. Human movement, animal movement, the cooling of stone, the flow of water, and the changing sky all belong to the same unforced transition. The first lamps of Rome begin to appear in the distance, not yet numerous, not yet bright, but faint and scattered, like earthly answers to the earliest stars. Above the aqueducts, the last band of gold narrows along the horizon, and the higher sky deepens toward blue, then indigo, then a dusky, transparent darkness into which the arches rise with increasing stillness. Their openings, once filled with amber air, now hold shadow. Their upper lines, where the water continues unseen, retain for a moment the final trace of light, a thin edge of fading brightness against the evening. And still the water moves. It moves whether watched or unwatched, whether praised or forgotten, whether the city is loud at noon or softened at dusk. It passes through channels, along gradients, over arches, beneath covered conduits, into settling chambers, out toward distribution tanks, and finally into the countless basins where Rome receives it without always remembering the distance it has traveled. In that constancy, there is a profound calm, a reassurance deeper than monument or inscription, because it belongs to continuity itself. So the twilight gathers over the aqueducts, over the fields, over the long roads leading homeward, and over the eternal city waiting in its basin of hills. The air cools. The sky changes from gold to rose, from rose to violet, from violet to blue. The arches darken into silhouette, enormous and gentle against the fading west. And above them, hidden in the high stone channel, the water continues its endless, soothing passage toward Rome, carrying with it the memory of springs, the quiet labor of builders, the patience of gravity, and the promise that through the coming night, the fountains will not cease their murmuring. Chapter 6. The Midnight Sentinel. At midnight, when the last warmth of the day has withdrawn from the stones, and the city has surrendered almost entirely to sleep, Rome becomes less a place of voices and footsteps than a vast arrangement of shadows, breathing beneath a sky so deep and lucid that the stars appear not scattered above it, but set carefully within its darkened blue, like small points of silver pressed into velvet. The 7 hills, which through the day held the movements of thousands, now rise in layered quiet. Their roofs, gardens, temples, stairways, and walls softened by darkness, until the whole city seems to have returned to the earth from which it was built. Nothing has vanished, yet everything has become gentler. Marble has lost its glare. Bronze has cooled into obscurity. Roads that carried carts, sandals, litters, animals, prayers, petitions, and errands now lie open and unclaimed, their worn surfaces receiving only moonlight, starlight, and the occasional drifting leaf. In this profound nocturnal stillness, the Colosseum stands as the great sentinel of the sleeping city, immense and dark against the heavens, its tiers of arches rising one above another in a solemn rhythm that seems almost beyond human scale. By day, its stone is architecture, spectacle, civic memory, and imperial design. At midnight, it is something quieter and more elemental, a mountain of ordered shadow, a hollowed mass of travertine, tufa, brick, and ancient labor resting beneath the stars. The outer arches hold darkness within themselves, each opening like a silent chamber facing the night, while the higher courses receive the moon along broken edges, cornices, and weathered blocks, so that the whole structure is traced in pale silver and deep blue-grey. No crowd stirs within it now. No murmur rises through the passages. The stairways, corridors, vomitoria, and vaulted chambers hold only the cool breath of night. And if a sound enters, it is altered immediately by the amphitheatre's inward vastness, rounded, softened, and returned to silence. A small animal may move somewhere among the lower stones. A night bird may cross the open oval of sky above the arena floor, briefly visible and then gone. The faintest wind may pass through the arches, touching rough stone, loosened dust, and the dark mouths of corridors, but it does not disturb the stillness. Rather, it reveals it, as a finger drawn across the surface of water reveals the water's calm by barely troubling it. The arena itself, emptied of day and human intention, lies in a darkness that feels almost blue. Moonlight descends unevenly through the open crown of the amphitheatre, settling in pale shapes along exposed masonry, broken lines, thresholds, and stairs. Where shadows gather, they seem deep enough to hold centuries. Where light rests, it does so with extraordinary delicacy, not brightening the place so much as allowing its sleeping form to be sensed. The Colosseum at midnight does not ask to be understood. It watches, it endures. It stands among the hills as though listening to the slow pulse of Rome beneath the surface of sleep. Farther west, beyond the darkened forums and the clustered roofs, the Tiber continues its quiet passage through the night, bearing moonlight in long, trembling ribbons across its surface. By day, the river is brown, practical, ancient, edged by traffic, trade, quays, warehouses, barges, and calls from the banks. At midnight, it becomes a darker and more meditative presence, moving through the city like a thought that cannot be hurried. The moon, suspended above the hills, breaks upon the current in shifting fragments, silver appearing and dissolving among black ripples, each small gleam carried downstream before it can be held. Along the banks, reeds lean into shadow. Stone embankments exhale the cold they have gathered. Ropes at moorings make rare, soft sounds when the water lifts and lowers the boats by the smallest measure. The bridges sleep above the river, their arches reflected below in wavering darkness, so that stone and water seem to complete one another in silence. On the Ponts Fabricius, on the older crossings, on the approaches worn by centuries of feet. There are no crowds now, only the faint geometry of moonlit parapets and the occasional distant step of a watchman passing with a lamp held low. The flame trembles inside its small vessel of oil, amber against the blue night, and then moves away, leaving the bridge once more to the river, the stars, and the slow, soft pressure of flowing water. Across Rome, lamps burn in scattered places, not enough to conquer the darkness, but enough to suggest the tenderness of human life enclosed within it. In an upper room, a small flame wavers behind a shutter, perhaps beside a sleeping child, perhaps near a household shrine where the Lares keep their quiet guardianship over the family within. Near a courtyard, an oil lamp glows beside the last embers of a brazier, illuminating the rim of a basin, the edge of a folded cloth, and the dark leaves of a plant that will release its scent again at dawn. In a guard post, a lamp smokes faintly, giving off the mingled odor of oil, soot, warmed clay, and wool cloaks. Along a narrow street, a single flame makes the plaster of a wall appear briefly golden before the darkness resumes its patient dominion. The city is not without life, but its life has lowered itself to the quietest register. A dog sleeps in a doorway with its nose beneath its tail. a fountain continues to fill its basin in a small public square, its water sounding clearer now that the voices of the day have faded. Somewhere in the distance, a door settles in its frame. Somewhere, an infant turns in sleep. Somewhere, a late reader, too wakeful for rest, lets a scroll close softly and lowers the lamp. These sounds are not interruptions, but part of the city's nocturnal breathing, delicate and widely spaced, each one appearing, dissolving, and leaving the surrounding silence larger than before. Over the Palatine, the great houses lie in darkness, their courtyards filled with moonlit air, their colonnades casting long, faint shadows across mosaic floors. The Capitoline holds its temples in a solemn hush, their forms indistinct but still elevated, still facing the sky with the composure of old vows. The Aventine rests broad and gardened, with black cypress shapes rising above walls, and the distant scent of leaves cooled by night. The Caelian, Esquiline, Quirinal, and Viminal recede into the same immense calm, each hill no longer separate in activity, but joined by darkness into one sleeping body of stone and earth. Rome at midnight is not the Rome of procession, exchange, judgment, bathing, building, ceremony, or command. It is the Rome beneath all of those things, the slower Rome, the resting Rome, the city that continues even when almost no one is looking. Above it all, the stars remain steady. Without the smoke and brightness of later ages, the ancient sky descends more intimately upon the city, revealing clusters, faint bands of light, and solitary points that seem to watch as patiently as the monuments below. The moon lays a pale path over roof tiles, temple steps, columns, and the upper stones of the Colosseum, then passes on to the river, where it breaks again into trembling silver. Time appears to stretch in every direction, backward into legend, forward into unknown centuries, downward into buried foundations, upward into the cold, radiant distance of the heavens. And so, the 24 hours of Rome come to rest beneath the midnight sky. The dawn mist, the sacred morning road, the cool library shadows, the jasmine courtyard, the twilight aqueducts, and now this great amphitheater of silence all gather into one final measured stillness. The Colosseum remains standing, vast and watchful. The Tiber continues to carry the moon toward the sea. Oil lamps flicker and fade in their distant rooms. The 7 hills sleep under stars, and over the eternal city there settles a peace so complete, so enduring, and so softly held by stone, water, night, and memory, that even history itself seems for a little while to breathe more slowly.